everybody, and welcome to WTF Hammer Underworlds. Today we're going to do a Season 1 Warband balancing video looking at the Ironskull boys. In the description I've linked the video that I made where I reviewed this warband, and during that review I came to the following conclusions. Ironskull boys can gain glory through support, which helps counterbalance their unexceptional attack accuracy. These guys also have a lot of wounds and a likely to occur inspire mechanic, but their objective cards that promote toughness are not exceptional, and there are none that actually support their inspiring mechanic. Also notably, most of their objectives promote engaging the enemy and killing their enemy, but their low movement and unreliable out-of-turn attack power cards make this difficult. And finally, they have cards that support an aggressive playstyle, but this results in them having a lack of versatility and having no inherent ability to score passive glory except in the third end phase. So based on this summary, I'd concluded that these guys were rated as a C. So therefore, what we have to do is buff these guys. I'm going to be giving suggestions as to what kind of improvements we can make to the Ironskull boys to make them more competitive compared to other warbands like Grimwatch, like Hrothgorns, just the top guys who are always doing well in it. And in order to do this, I'm going to do what I always do. I'm going to be proposing errata suggestions, so modifications to the existing rules for these guys, and also proposing some new faction-specific cards that can help give these guys that buff that they desperately need. I'm going to be starting with the errata. And my only real suggestion for errata for these guys are power card errata. Specifically, that having a good time and last lunge not be conditional on a 50% die roll. So I've blacked out most of the description of these cards, but generally these things read, for having a good time, you choose a fighter and then you roll an attack die, and on a hammer or a crit, they can make an attack action, which means you play this card and then there's only a 50% chance that they actually make that attack action. And last lunge is similar. As a reaction, you play this during an attack action or ploy that will take a friendly fighter out of action. Before removing them from the battlefield, you roll a die, and once again, on a crit or a hammer, you make an attack action with that fighter and it must target the attacker. And as you can see from my errata suggestions, I would just recommend removing this whole 50% die roll chance entirely. My justification is that it would give this warband some reliable out-of-turn attacks, which would make them scary and would make them unique. So you'd have a situation where an orc closes in on you, either by charging or by moving or by being pushed. And then you can get a spontaneous out-of-turn attack action with having a good time. Or if one of your guys actually gets taken out of action, you can get a guaranteed attempt at a swing through last lunge as long as you're taken out of action by an adjacent enemy fighter. So it would just make being close to these guys a bit scarier, because as it stands, they're not very scary with their mediocre to hit, and they're pretty high but not necessarily exceptional damage. The other power card errata I suggest would be to make the upgrade Ard Ed not be restricted to just Haka and Basha, so that any fighter who equips this, whether it's Bone Kutta or Gurzag, can also gain the benefits of this card, that being -1 damage to a minimum of 1 when attacked. And my justification for this is that it would just help toughen up this warband as a whole. I mean, these guys are supposed to be the tough guys, they're supposed to be the brawny dudes, they're supposed to be the guys who can take a beating and keep on coming, and as it stands, they're definitely not the toughest warband. Because I'm pretty sure that title goes to Thundrix Profiteers for some reason. So those are my errata suggestions for Ironskull boys. Just to summarize, I recommend power card errata, specifically that having a good time and last lunge not be conditional on a 50% die roll, and that Ard Ed not be restricted to Haka and Basha, but that it be available to all members of this warband. And my final suggestions for balancing relate to new faction-specific cards. And as I always do, I just want to make it clear as to how I would recommend new faction cards be introduced into Warhammer Underworlds, so that it's consistent amongst the different warbands. And my recommendation is as follows: that deck building in general requires 12 objectives and 20 or more power cards, to which you must have 10 Gambit card and at least 10 upgrade cards. You can have more upgrades than Gambits, but not vice versa, but Gambits tend to be more useful in general, so it's good to have a 50-50 split of those two cards. Ironskull boys have 10 objective cards, 11 Gambits, and 10 upgrades, meaning that they need 2 objective cards and 1 upgrade card to be able to play out of the box. That means you'd be able to just grab this deck and go if you had 2 more objective cards and 1 more upgrade card as faction-specific cards for these guys. So the obvious solution I have to provide here is that we create 2 useful objective cards and 1 useful upgrade to improve their weaknesses and to enhance their strengths. And my suggestions are as follows. With regard to objective cards, I'd suggest something that takes advantage of this warband's extra ploy attack actions. This warband's unique in that it actually has out-of-turn attack actions through Last Lunge, through Having a Good Time, whereas if my suggestions were taken into account, would be attacks that would certainly be able to happen since they wouldn't be dependent on that 50% conditional roll. And the objective card that I would suggest to take advantage of this would be some kind of a faction-specific Keep Chopping, but without the timing restrictions. So Keep Chopping typically reads, score this in an end phase if your warband made 4 attack actions during activations in the preceding action phase. So I wouldn't necessarily limit it to the 8 activations that occur in a round, but would just allow this card to be scored if 4 or more attacks are taken in general. So I'd word it as, score this in an end phase if your warband made 4 or more attack actions in the preceding action phase, not contingent on any sort of specific timing. And you can call this Keep Itting Them. And my justification would be that this would encourage an aggressive playstyle, which is always fun, which I always encourage in these videos, and it would also complement their power cards. So their power cards would give them an added benefit of being able to get attacks out of turn and would allow them to more easily make those 4 attack actions, even if they can't necessarily land 4 attack actions throughout their 4 activations in a round. My next suggestion to give these guys a buff would be a card that provides passive glory, but in a thematic way. So I discussed that these guys are very limited in their passive glory, and other warbands can often keep away from them and just rack up passive glory before these guys can actually close the distance and start making those swings to collect their own glory. And my recommendation would be a faction-specific Heroes All, but instead of being worth 1 glory point, I would make it worth 2 glory points so that it's actually valuable, better than Fired Up, and worth putting in the deck, and it'd be called No Pain, No Gain. And it would be read as follows, score this in an end phase if all of your surviving fighters, at least 3, are inspired. So it encourages just throwing your guys up against enemies, letting them get hit, letting them inspire from getting hit, so No Pain, No Gain would be an appropriate title. And my justification for this is that it would profit Ironskull's Boyz for their inherent easy inspire condition, because right now they do not have any objective cards that do so. So that does it for my recommendations for new objective cards. My final recommendation would be an upgrade card for these guys, namely a card that makes this warband even tougher. I mentioned before that these guys are supposed to be the tough guys. They're supposed to be the guys who can just take a beating and keep on coming. I mean, their Inspire mechanic is even based on getting attacked. So to make these guys even tougher, I'd recommend something simple, just a faction-specific Great Fortitude, a simple +1 wound that can be applied to any fighter. It can be called Burly Boys. Justification being that they're supposed to be the toughest, but they aren't. It would make them tougher. It also makes scoring toughness-related objectives more likely because they do have a number of objectives that require them to take hits and survive or just avoid dying. And as it stands, those are very hard to pull off, so a simple +1 wound upgrade card would actually help them to achieve those objectives, thus giving them a buff and helping them be more competitive against some of the stronger warbands. So my intention with these videos is always to keep them short and sweet. So you have the errata up there that I recommend, and just to summarize the new faction-specific cards, I'd recommend 2 new objective cards to allow this warband to be able to be played out of the box. A faction-specific Keep Chopping, but without the timing restrictions, which could be called Keep Itting Them, and a faction-specific Heroes All, but instead of being worth 1, would be worth 2 glory points, called No Pain, No Gain. And also a new upgrade card, because that's what they need to have a valid deck, which could be a faction-specific Great Fortitude, called Burly Boys, just to make these guys a little bit tougher. So these are my thoughts, everybody. Please share your thoughts, please share your suggestions. You can comment below, please like and subscribe if you like these videos and you want me to keep making more of them. I appreciate that you tuned in today, and next week I'm going to be covering the Chosen Axes.